Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. My name's Corey, and I'm the Marketing Director here at Turn Zero, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar titled The CSM Journey, Carving Your CSM Career Path. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you that we are recording this session, and we will be sending out a link to the recording 24 hours after this webinar. We're glad to be talking about this topic today as part of our CSM Appreciation Week programming. For those that have submitted the CSM award nominations, we will be announcing the finalists in the 6 award categories on Monday, and we will be opening up public voting then, so please stay tuned. Throughout this presentation today, we do ask that you go ahead and submit your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please use this to submit your questions instead of using the chat for questions. And we'll address as many as we can during the Q&A portion at the end of this webinar. Now, I'm pleased to introduce to you our presenter today. We have Peter Armaly. Peter is the VP of Customer Success at ESG, which delivers customer success as a service. Peter is well known in the customer success industry as a visionary leader, having previously held senior roles in both customer success and marketing at Oracle BMC Software, and was the first VP of Customer Success Research at TSIA, which makes him the perfect speaker for us to talk to us today on this topic of advancing your career path in CS. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar. As Corey said, I'm Peter Armaly, and I am right now in Orlando, Florida, at the conclusion of a conference, TSW, put on by TSIA, and I'll just kind of quickly say what I've learned reinforces everything that stands behind this presentation you're about to kind of sit through that I'm going to present to you. And I just want to say it's a huge topic, right? I think you guys all know that. You're experiencing this. That's why you're attending the webinar, in part because you want to understand maybe my thoughts on this. And so that's what the next 45 minutes is going to be about, is Peter Armaly's kind of view of maybe what you should be thinking about as you kind of chart your way forward in your customer success career. And to that, I'll just talk a little bit about the agenda. It's not a formal agenda, but the way I view this topic is you need to, if you're going to start thinking about how I can grow as a customer success professional, you really need to understand the bigger picture, which is there's a whole host of forces at play that you need to be aware of. And whether you see the direct impact or feel it more kind of an indirect way, it's happening. There's a lot of forces at play in the industry, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that and its effect on you, and how that will kind of play into what you want to do going forward. And, related to that is because of these forces, I just believe now is when everyone should just be really more serious than ever about owning. The word owning your career path is very important for me to communicate, because I feel that in some sense, even if you're employed by large companies, you should really think of yourself as kind of a semi-autonomous business person who owns, your life. And maybe that sounds a little trite. It's not meant to be. It's actually meant to be that you take control of the situation, and that's what that's about. And then we'll move into more specifically what I think of as skills for the various roles within customer success. And then finally, some factors I think you should consider when you're looking to grow. That's how I'll conclude the presentation. So we're going to start with a poll, right, Corey? And I'd like everyone to just kind of quickly answer the question of the items in this list. What's the number one pressure you face in your role today? Let's give it a little bit of time.
A lot of responses come in. Go ahead and I'll end the poll and I will share the results.
Okay, Just very quickly, I just make a couple of comments. I think this is not a surprise to me. I was thinking that probably maybe not most, but the largest number would be the one at the bottom. I want to do more, but I'm stuck figuring out what to do next. And that's, I guess, good, because I hope to be able to help you through this presentation. The others, of course, are kind of long-term, typical challenges for anybody in any kind of occupation. How do I get trained? How do I learn what I can do? And then the next two, increase customer expectations. And actually customer expectations is more particular to customer success. Manager expectations are true of almost any occupation, of course. So thanks for contributing to that, and we'll just move forward. Okay, so can I close this? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. It's not advancing. Okay, here we go. So LinkedIn put out a study, a pretty large study. It's actually a little old now, 2018, but I think it still applies. The study was all about really trying to measure employee engagement of 4,000. I think there's 4,000 professionals, and 94% believe or said that they would be willing to stay or want to stay in their current employment if the company were to invest more in their career development. And then that speaks to that tenuous relationship that a lot of managers and leaders worry about, but try not to think too hard about because it's too scary, which is how long will my people stay with me? With budgets being what they are, we can only do so much around training. But the truth is, a lot of people are always thinking about, I wish there was more the company was doing for me around my career development. And then that speaks to the engagement. So 85% of employees are not engaged. That's a frightening statistic, frankly, if you're a leader. How do you keep that number low? I mean, it's pretty frighteningly high. How do you make sure your team isn't part of that 85%? That's kind of like number one job for a manager today. And then the bottom graphic, I put that there because it speaks to me, because the people responded and said they have more if they want to do more training, or what would lead them to spend more time learning the workplace skills. And it's interesting that the number one thing they're waiting for is the manager to direct them to do that. So the top two items, I think, speak to waiting for guidance. So that, as someone who's kind of focuses a lot on helping customer success professionals grow their leadership skills, tells me that's a big, important initiative for CS leaders to really improve on, is making sure enablement is like probably the number one thing you do with your team, is figuring out what they need to do to grow in their roles. To that point, you don't want them to be part of that body of employees that will leave if they're not satisfied around career development. And all of this kind of leads me to kind of roll my eyes in a sense, because I feel like the career path that still exists for most companies looks kind of like this. And I didn't change these icons, or the human representatives here. They're all male, they're all wearing suits, because that's often how companies view progression. And it's a sad statistic that that women are promoted, I want to say 14% less. I actually have it in my notes in this presentation, 14% less than men, their peers, through this kind of progressive career path. And so when I put out the LinkedIn post around this, about this topic here in this webinar, I said, the career path, was linear this way. It was really kind of standard, very conventional. You should think of it more as a checkerboard. Now, I believe that you should see your career as kind of laid out in front of you. You have all these options, and you should kind of just figure out which one you want to go to, based on your preferences and your skills and what makes sense in terms of your future trajectory, betting on a particular company or a particular industry, that sort of thing. So in other words, you need to take more ownership of where you go on the chessboard versus just, waiting for your manager or your director to figure out what you need to do next to move from associate to junior to senior to principal. A couple more pieces of research. Deloitte put out a study more recently around engagement too, and it's more around what companies are suffering from employee disengagement. $300 billion productivity hit. That's huge. And but companies that have more engaged employees enjoy higher revenue rates, 2.3 times greater than average. So if there's any executives in the audience, this is really powerful information for you to think about if you're really trying to prioritize the programs you're running to drive engagement. And typically that's around career development. And it's not just about putting great coffee machines in your cafeterias. And finally, I would say on this slide, the bottom line is the engagement level dictates, in a sense, how you're going to be successful as a company. So really prioritize that well. And if you're an individual contributor, this should be kind of a validating slide for you that what you're feeling, it's being recognized by some research bodies that are trying to communicate to senior leaders they need to really pay more attention to the needs of the employee base. Finally, McKinsey put out a study, a big study as well, showing the various reasons why people left their job, even when they did not have another job. This people who reported here did not have jobs to go to. They just left their jobs. And I circled a bunch of them that I feel are related to career development. So work performance expectations, there's a mismatch between the expectations. And that could be just training, right? Enablement. Career development, obviously, everyone just pops out. Lack of meaningful work. Maybe it's because they don't understand the value to the company of the work that they do. So that's really, in my mind, a management fail, because that's part of what the job of manager is, to make sure that people understand the value of the actual things they're doing to the impact it has on the company's revenue. Lack of support for employee health and well-being. Well, we know, right? When people are disengaged, it does affect health and well-being. Lack of workplace flexibility. Maybe the job, the roles that you're in are too rigid, and you don't feel there's any kind of room for movement, and not just sideways or up, but actually just in learning. So it's kind of rigid kind of environment where you're not getting kind of any kind of expansive opportunities for your brain. And finally, I would just kind of circle inadequate resource accessibility. And that can, in a customer success landscape, that might speak to not being able to know how to get information. And that can be super frustrating, right? So you're not learning enough because you don't know where to go, or you're not able to do the job enough because you don't have the ability to kind of tap into the right resources to get the help you need or the information you need. So moving to customer success, this is a recommendation slide, just simple as that. Be flexible, thinking around the way you do your job, but also in terms of your career, just be more open-minded and really flexible. And I just feel that knowing what's going on in the world right now, not just the business world, but the world, I think the best position people can take at this time is to be really flexible in terms of the way they approach work and their careers, because I feel that to bet on what the world's going to look like in 3 years is probably as far ahead you can go. Beyond that, if you said what's going to happen in 5 or 8 years, you're delusional, because too many things can change. So part of the reason that things cannot be projected that far away, I believe, is that there's so many trends that are happening in customer success alone. And here's a list I put together for individual contributors. You guys can probably nod your head at a lot of these things: higher account ratios, requirement for faster time to first value, more data. Value realization is still on the table, always has been for 30 years. And it's still probably the number one thing that customer success needs to prove: value realization for the customers. And those customers have higher expectations now. More complex orchestration of effort to provide the service to customers, more processes. more processes that you need to look at. Even if you're a CSM, you need to be part of that effort. What processes should be automated? You should be part of that conversation if you're interested in expanding your roles within your company. More frequent need for training, product training, because the products are always changing all the time, and there's always that ongoing need to learn. This next one, greater need for domain knowledge, is becoming increasingly important in our industry in customer success, because customers are expecting the more technology improves the way support does its job, and the more technology helps CSMs do their jobs, the more the expectation is that CSMs rise and kind of elevate themselves to be more at the business layer. So that's something you should be thinking about as a CSM, is what do I need to do to learn more about my customer's business, the industries that they're in, why they bought our products, what value they're hoping to achieve. All that kind of conversational kind of components are really important. So that's that kind of collectively we'll call domain knowledge. And tied to that are the consultative approach methodologies that you should be thinking about improving and refining. Your ability to kind of have consultative conversations with clients, but not just clients, but with peers in your own company. It helps to open the conversation when you adopt that kind of an approach. And finally, this is kind of a tough subject for CSMs, not just CSMs, but customer success professionals to kind of really accept, is that there needs to be more accountability for customer success to be tied to the company's revenue. And there's always an ongoing debate about that. But from the C-level, that's the thing that will convince them of the value of customer success, if there can be that kind of direct connection. Now, the leaders, on the other hand, on the other side, all these things are happening that are forcing them to, there's a lot of pressure on them because of these things that are happening. More rapid change, more accountability to that point about revenue, the expectations from CSMs themselves, that the whole training enablement, but more than that, more just kind of credibility of the leader to be the person that should be leading the team, that sort of thing. There's all that kind of ongoing pressure on leadership, increased expectations from the business for the revenue impact, the need to strategize for scale. Customer success is always talking about scale. It's becoming one of the biggest topics. Even this conference this week talked a lot about customer success really needs to scale to touch all customers. Talent management, leveraging technology to drive efficiencies, productivity equals dollars. And you need to be able to prove that kind of equation if you're a leader. On driving cross-organizational efficiencies, how do you make sure CSMs are able to do their job? And part of that job requires them to work with other organizations. It's the leader's job to make sure that those walls are lowered as much as possible. And then another big job for leaders is to evangelize customer success. You can't just expect leaders in sales and leaders in marketing and support to know what customer success is all about if no one's really kind of educating them. So the leaders need to take that on. And finally, you need to develop the resilience for your team through all of this, these trends that are happening. And so that's it's a big job being a leader, but that's what I see as the trends that are forcing leaders to become better at their jobs. So why is all this happening? Because of what's happening in the world. More advanced technologies being adopted all the time, and it's not going to slow down. AI, despite people's qualms about it, and there's a legitimate concerns around this stuff, but it's being widely adopted. It's being absorbed by companies all the time. And it's a good thing generally for this to happen, because it will drive efficiencies. It will drive the ability for more automation, better automation that should allow CSMs and leaders to do their jobs better and get more fulfillment. The cloud, fully embraced by business now, de facto platform, right? The pandemic induced labor force movement is really complicating the world of business because of the opening up, and people are, moving jobs all the time. So it really complicates the job of a leader to lead an organization if people have, moved on for a variety of reasons. And so that also kind of factors in the need to introduce more automation and all that kind of stuff. Companies, society are just facing a lot of uncertainty, and I don't have to tell you what those are. They're just obvious in the news all the time. But the heightening consumer expectations, and you are a consumer too, and I think you'd probably admit your expectations rise all the time for service, for product, reliability, everything. Everything you buy, you expect a certain kind of level of performance, and this almost goes unconscious, but companies feel that. You feel that when you're working for a company that's producing goods and services. So how do you deal with that? You need to figure out how to become resilient, right? And it's not just the leader's job to help you be resilient. You can do it yourself by understanding how to be more of an adaptive thinker. And that just simply means being more nimble, being able to kind of absorb and respond to change that's happening all the time, breaking the mold. And that's not to say you need to be a renegade or a rebel. It just means that just because the job's has been done a certain way for quite a while, doesn't mean it has to be that way all the time. You can offer up ideas based on your own performance in the role and your own ideas for how it can improve. So I would suggest that would be a way for you to become more resilient, is by having the conversation with people who can help expand the role to make it more gratifying, not just for you, but gratifying for the customer at the end of the day. Think sideways. And that's the whole checkerboard philosophy that I'm kind of espousing, which is to say, career pathing doesn't always have to be vertical, right? You can actually get more appreciation of you, but also for yourself. You get more value sometimes by looking sideways for opportunities to increase your own feeling of self-worth and the contributions that you may be making to the company. Pay close attention to signs in the road ahead. That simply means, you need to be a student of business. And no matter what you're in, what role you're in, you have to just be paying attention. Pay attention to what your leaders are saying, but not just that. Pay attention to what's happening in the news and what it might have effects that have on your company, on your customers, so that you kind of just become more aware, generally aware, so that you can maybe anticipate what you need to do to improve and maybe move ahead. Finally, I would say just a general rule of thumb for everybody, just try to practice open conversation. That helps here, but just be honest and if you're having some difficulty, don't be afraid to bring those things up. I think that's a way to develop this kind of muscle around resilience. So today's career path, as I mentioned, doesn't have to be straight up. It can be adjacent to the skills that help individuals in customer success roles excel, which is customer-oriented focus, data fluency, collaboration, communication, project management. Those things are transferable even within your own company. So education services would benefit completely from people from CS roles wanting to move into kind of education services roles if those things are available. And I'm not going to go around the whole circle. You guys see those things, but that's the point of this slide, is that don't just think of your role as being limited to customer success. It could be very valuable. The skills you've learned and what you enjoy doing might be even more applicable in another role. But within customer success, there's room for growth. And you probably know that more obviously because you're in the role, that you probably know even in your own company, you can grow in your role as a CSM to become a more senior CSM, or you can become a leader of customer success. But I'd like to, even for small companies, have them think that even if they don't have groups for marketing, CS marketing and CS operations, there might come a day when they do. And why not you? If you appreciate, kind of build, or that kind of like customer kind of more digital kind of operations or building process, and you're a CSM in a small environment and they don't have those roles yet, you could start demonstrating that, though, I would say, and recommend you do that. And maybe that would be a way for your leaders to start working with you to kind of develop that kind of function. And that would be extremely valuable way for you to kind of step up in your company, is by demonstrating that kind of independence, independent thinking, and then you work collaboratively with others to kind of establish a more formal practice around, say, CS marketing and CS operations. Because frankly, those two functions are becoming really paramount in customer success. Those have a very bright future. So I'd recommend if you have the kind of like tendencies towards, and we'll talk about that in a couple of slides, what skills would be required for those, then you should probably be exploring that. So what skills do you need in a customer success manager role? And these are just Peter Armaly's kind of observations for 15 years, but more, validating them with lots of conversations I have with lots of people, observing it in a lot of clients, doing a lot of research. This is what I think the kind of skills that are helpful to be for any specific role. So a CSM should be data curious. They should be the ones who are most successful are the ones who look at their customer portfolio and try to connect the dots that create kind of generalized insights into what works best. And then that can help them have better conversations with their customers. Pattern matching is kind of related to that, but that would be a way for you to kind of look at your customers and say, okay, this particular persona is common across these customers and they all are experiencing the same sort of thing. I can bring that kind of knowledge back and work with, if I have a CS operations team, they can probably start thinking about, okay, well, now we can produce a new kind of playbook or a new kind of action within the process that can kind of address the needs of that particular persona. And that would be an example of collaborating. People who excel in CSM roles have to be exceedingly good at collaborating, and not just with customers, but with peer organizations, especially in I came from Oracle. I was there for almost 6 years. That was a major part. It still is a major part of a CSM's job at Oracle, is to be exceedingly good at collaborating with other organizations to deliver the kind of service that customers need. This next one, it might be controversial, but I believe CSMs need to be good at selling, but not selling. So you're not a salesperson, but you have to figure out how you can kind of persuade the customer at the right time to start thinking more expansively about the partnership, about the opportunities that exist within the solution. Yeah, you should be doing that a lot. And so if you're interested in the role of customer success manager role to more senior levels, that would be a way for you to kind of demonstrate the competency that's really valuable to your employer. Finally, this is almost like a no-brainer, communicating with clarity, right? So, and credibility. That skill is so essential to customer success management, but even more so the higher you rise. Now, for customer success operations, I realize I'm kind of moving through the deck a little quickly, but we want to leave some time for questions from the audience. And so customer success operations, I mentioned it's really becoming a kind of a paramount kind of function within customer success. So this has a very bright future. It's because customer success, generally speaking, needs to be moving more towards a kind of a scientific approach, I'll say, which is just, monitor, measure, iterate, improve. So customer success operations can lay down the kind of fundamentals for that kind of practice or business rhythm. And so people in this role should be, the obvious is you should be data and statistics curious, but I want to add on business curious, because the contextual value of having someone in CS operations who understands the business domain is really powerful. And so they can add a lot of value to the senior leadership's effort to scale, to drive more efficiencies if they have that kind of business awareness of what would work for the kinds of customers that the company is selling to. The skills that are necessary too are like building from concept to prototype. If you enjoy doing that and you have some sort of history of being involved in that sort of thing, that's really valuable. The next one, project leadership. It's so essential in this role. Analytical thinking. This is rather obvious, but it's so important to call out that you can't just say, I've been involved in, data analysis projects. You have to actually enjoy doing that. It takes a kind of special breed of individual who gets excited by looking at data and trying to connect the dots and figuring out what is this trying to say. And for anyone who really excels at the CS ops role, this is what I've noticed, is that they're really great at that particular skill. And this next one, this is more of a challenge from Peter to the audience, is that if you want to be really great in CS ops, you need to be able to present and defend an argument, because there are going to be opportunities in CS operations where you're going to want to advance an argument and persuade people why it's important to scale to introduce this new process. You need to be able to explain why that matters to the business. What benefits will the business derive from introducing a new process? What benefits will a customer derive by you doing this organization creating a new process and executing it? CS marketing. This is, if you don't know of any marketers, they actually have more of a scientific brain than most people realize, because their job is all about marketing. I'm sorry, about data, really. Looking at data, trying to figure out how they can leverage it to amplify information that's meaningful for their employer. They also have to drive strategy through conducting research. They're often asked to, the executives might come up with a strategy, but it has to be supported by research that validates through multiple kind of different ways that the strategy makes sense for the business. So I would say the same thing exists in CS marketing, where there's going to be a need for people who have good research skills to figure out what's the best approach for not just nurturing our customers through content, but what else should we be doing by looking at the customers and understanding what are these data points trying to tell us, so that we can turn around and be more precise with the information that the customer needs at that moment. Collaboration, obviously, for CS marketing is really important, because we have to work with the other teams. And I also feel that CS marketers benefit from being inspirational. So communication is part of the role. Even if they're in the background operating a process, the information, the messaging that they're putting out there needs to be inspiring. And it needs to be inspiring sometimes without supporting proof. So I'm not suggesting that they would intentionally want to lie about something, but sometimes based on your best educated guess, and sometimes so you just have to be kind of a little bit brave around that kind of stuff. So CS marketers are a little bit different breed of personality. So I think you guys are understanding what I'm getting at. There's various different personas now in customer success, and I'm trying to kind of call those out. Finally, the CS leadership. This first one is really important for me. I've been a leader a long time, and I've always prided myself on my ability to connect what the C-level is saying to the market, to the company, with what people on my team need to do. So I try to draw that kind of clarity between layers. So basically align that corporate vision with the tasks and the responsibilities of the team. That's really an important kind of skill for leadership. And, you need to be courageous, stepping out in front of the team, leading. That's what leading is all about. Frankly, if you can sum up the word leading, it's all about being courageous, trying to get out there in front with messaging, with ideas, advancing ideas. It might not be your ideas, but you still have to advance them and support them. And you need to be able to believe that, especially these days, as customer success moves into more, like I said, the more scientific kind of realm, measurement's going to be critical. And the more a leader believes that measurement will expose truth, then they will be more confident in leading the team. Process creation and adherence. This is kind of more just making sure the team runs the process and adheres to the process, because it was developed for a reason. It's not to say it goes unquestioned. It just means that if they truly believe that the process brings benefits, then that's how team muscle gets developed. And so it's really important skill for managers and leaders. And finally, communications. This is probably the most, of all the roles, communications as a leader is really critical, because you have such an enormous kind of influence over the people on your team. Their needs for wanting to do their job really well, require clarity, consistent kind of messaging, in a kind of a respectful, not kind of, again, a respectful way, that can, kind of nurture them in their role, and while at the same time allowing you to kind of have the job that you need to do performed, which is basically just running the team. So how can you grow into all of this? And just basically, I should say, be honest with yourself. Ask yourself these questions. What am I good at? What do I enjoy being? Do I enjoy being at the forefront of change? Change is so constant now in customer success, and it's not going to let up. It's just going to keep getting greater. And the closing keynote at the TSIA conference was all about how something some of us have talked about for a few years, but it was really great to see it on stage at the close. Was companies are now going to have to figure out how to accelerate the growth of customer success to make it truly like a big part of the mission of a company, in a not so much just as an equal of sales, but as really the most important part of a company, because it's the way for outcomes to be realized. The customers buy something and it needs to get fulfilled. And so the customer success mentality really has to become even more prominent in companies than the way we even talk about it now. So point being, change is just going to continually increase, and you need to ask yourself, do I enjoy being part of that? So do I see how the role I'm in can contribute to the corporate goals? Do I envision how I can grow? Am I self-aware enough to know when I should ask for assistance and guidance? Do I see myself enjoying the process of making my job more efficient? This is a key thing that's going to happen in customer success. You're going to be asked to be part of the effort to improve your own job. And sometimes that means automating yourself out of a job. That's okay. That should be not a scary thing. If you're part of that kind of exercise, that means you're probably going to be, evolving into something bigger. And so I think you should embrace those opportunities. Do I have a sense of what I can do for customers that might set me apart? And I'm not saying you should be competitive with your peers. I'm just saying, if you see something happening, that a particular need in your customer environment, why not step up? Even if it's not part of a formal process. Can I carve out time required to focus on self-improvement? Am I disciplined enough to stick to it? And finally, do I have the kind of boss who can help me grow through clear feedback? Poll number 2. At your company today, what is the primary method you employ for learning the skills you need in order to excel in your role?
Give it a few more seconds.
Sure.
Awesome. Okay. End the poll and share the results.
Okay. So, this is interesting. I don't know what I was expecting when I wrote this question, but it's interesting, the results. So shattering's big, right? And so it's not a big surprise. I didn't think it would be that much of the primary, though. I thought there'd be more formal training. It's interesting that the third-party training provider is very low, because it's a good sample size here, 200 people or so. And the external customer success community engagement, I guess many of us who are part of that should feel good that many people are getting kind of value from that. But I'd like to see, I think we should take away from this poll that the formal training is disappointing, right? So, okay, let's move on here. Just a couple more slides. So I call this factors to consider. So you as an individual, regardless of those roles I talked about, I think what you should do, what I would say helps me all the time, is what work needs to be done within the role I'm in, but also around me in kind of the organization I'm in. Another factor I like to think about is what's the culture of the company I'm part of? Does it have an appetite for growing people? Which leads me to the next point, the management style of leaders. Are they of a mindset that they're openly communicative about wanting to grow people? Are they open-minded? Do they demonstrate open-mindedness, or are they more closed-mindedness? Because that should probably tell you something about your ability to kind of grow, not just within the role, but within the company. The trends for your business function and for your company's business. What I mean by that is, I spoke earlier about the trends in customer success. Those are things you should just keep an eye on and be aware of, and factor those into what you're thinking about. So what I mean by that is, let's look at CS marketing. I say there's trends that are happening that are pointing to CS marketing becoming even more prominent because of like the digital approach is going to be even bigger going forward. That's just going to be a fact of it's just math. You have thousands and thousands of customers. You cannot have thousands of CSMs. It's just impossible. So that'll be a growth area. So is your organization trending that way? Or is there some sort of a denial around the need for that? So all I'm saying is I don't have the answer for you. I'm just saying you should think about those things. And finally, probably the most important thing, what are your personal preferences? Just always be honest with yourself. If you like something, you should probably pursue it. And even if it's not in your role, you should probably pursue it. But also consider whether that your life circumstances allow for you to be in that pursuit. And then finally, what can you do? I can't remember what it says at the top because it's blocked, but so what can you do? You can work with your leader. You should always be learning. And what I mean by finish things, but if you can't, then it's, obviously you're going to try and finish things that you do with your customers and finish things you're doing that your boss has asked you to do. But sometimes you fail, and failure is okay as long as you learn from those things and you don't deny the lessons. So that theme a few times about being honest. This is a great way to grow is by trying to finish things. But if you can't, admit it to yourself that maybe you could have done things better, or at least understand why it didn't complete. And then understand the factors to consider. What that means is on the previous slide, understand those factors is what you can do to improve. Connect in a meaningful way with others outside your team. So you probably have relationships with people inside your team. Start that effort outside your team, outside your company, even outside your line of work and industry. I realize that's a lot of effort, and I don't expect that everyone's going to start tomorrow, if you're not already, and start reaching out and having these great conversations with everybody. It's a lot of time and effort, and you might not get receptive people. But I think it's a way to just be exposed to a lot more ideas and a lot more alternative ways of thinking and doing things, and that will be helpful for you. Find mentors and learn from them. And mentors don't always have to be in a super structured way. You don't have to just approach people and say, can you be my mentor? That can work. It's worked for me in the past, but I've had mentors who don't even know they've been my mentors. And I've just been, following what they say and observing what they do. And then I learn. And what I mean by they teach them too, in terms of a formal mentor, I've been a mentor and I'm still mentoring people, but I learned from the mentees. And I think you should, if you're in a mentor-mentee relationship, if you're the mentee, you should think about what can you bring to the equation that might help them grow too. And that's a great way to become stronger as an individual. Finally, and I've hit on this a couple of times, be open-minded. I think this is the only way really we're all going to survive in this world of constant change. The need to be resilient and nimble. The key skill there is being open-minded. And finally, just be brave, be bold, and just be kind. to everyone's kind of going through the same thing. And I think it's important that we just keep that in mind. And that is the end of the presentation. We're going to have a Q&A, but I'd like to thank everyone for your attention, and obviously Churn Zero. I appreciate you guys inviting me on this. As I said, it's a huge topic, really important topic. I've been running enablement for many years, and I just believe passionately in it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Peter. We've already had many comments saying that this was a very useful webinar, so thank you.
Okay.
And we've also had a lot of questions already come in, but I'd like to invite the rest of the audience to go ahead and please submit any questions you might have for Peter in your Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So I'm going to start off with just a question, two-part, because it came from two different people. So first, someone asked, what is domain knowledge? And then someone else asked, so after you kind of give a definition of that, what recommendations do you have for becoming a domain expert?
Yeah. Okay. So domain knowledge, I think I kind of tried to explain it there. It's just really your awareness of, probably the easiest way to think about it is you have a set of customers, and the customers are probably in a certain kind of industry. And, let me go back to my days at Oracle. So one of the applications that our teams supported was the ERP application. And there, if one of the CSMs had, the banking sector as its typical customer, it would not be a tough stretch for that CSM to just refine their knowledge and skills around having conversations around finance, around banking applications in general. What are the trends that are happening in the banking industry around, not just Bitcoin and stuff, but, just the kind of smaller startups that are trying to erode the big banks kind of customer base. And so there's those forces at work within your customer's environment that I think CSM should be aware of, because it makes you more meaningful as a business partner to customers when you speak their language. They don't expect you to be an expert because they're the expert. And I've actually had customers say to me, I don't expect Oracle to be the experts here, but what I expect you to do is be the expert at your applications. You can help us understand how we can leverage them better. But it'd be great if you guys understood what our problems were. And not just with your applications, but with our business. So that's what I mean by domain, understanding, having a greater appreciation for your customers' kind of business. And so the second part of that was, how do I learn about that?
And how do you become a domain expert?
Yeah.
Any recommendations?
So it's just kind of a step-by-step thing. You start having an interest. You have to have an interest in it. That's what I meant by business curiosity too. If you don't have the interest, you're probably not going to make it the effort. And then, if you're not going to make the effort, you're not going to become a domain expert, and you're not going to grow. But if you want to be, then start reading, start talking, start learning. There's probably tons of seminars, webinars you can attend that are very, 101. You don't have to be too sophisticated about it, but there's tons of journals that you can read that help you just get a general awareness. I mean, I read every day. Every single day I read news. And it's not just business pages, but about world events, global, local events, whatever happened. It's not like I read all the articles, but I'm aware of what's happening. And sometimes I'll hone in on a particular topic because I want to just learn that better. And it's helped. It's helped a lot to allow me to come to a conference like TSIA's conference and all these senior executives here and have decent conversations, I'd like to say, about some of these businesses that they're in, whether it's, machinery, how digital is kind of changing the landscape of the way they kind of monitor these end machines and all that kind of stuff. So it's just good that you just kind of consume information, I would say.
I think that's great advice, and really beneficial for CSMs to be able to level up that conversation and be seen as a partner with their customers. Another just kind of level set question. How do you define an engaged employee? I think this came about when you were giving the LinkedIn survey data. I don't know if there was a definition there, or maybe you want to share your own personal definition of engaged versus disengaged.
That's a great question because I didn't talk about that. But I'd have to go back to the research study and maybe I can kind of look back with you guys on that. I'm sure LinkedIn probably defined it, but I would say, as a leader, you can tell who your engaged people are. And it's usually the ones who raise their hand, who are contributing in meetings, also are the ones who are doing their job well. So I want to say engagement isn't just about being vocal in meetings, although that's an indicator. I would say it's also the ones who are, doing the job with their customers. So running their success plans, making progress, communicating, coordinating effort, all that kind of stuff you expect of great CSMs, they're doing that. That's engagement. If they weren't engaged, they wouldn't be doing that stuff. However, you can do all that stuff and be unhappy. But unhappiness doesn't necessarily mean disengagement, because I've been unhappy in jobs, but I've always been engaged. So this is a tricky part of management, is trying to figure out who all your individuals on your team, where are they in their heads with their role, and what can I do to make their life, it's not like it's all your responsibility, but in a sense, you kind of want to make them feeling more gratification in their job. And some of that is, you need to understand who they are. Some people just like doing the job great and hitting all the milestones and knocking off everything. But in the meetings, maybe they're just kind of like, they wait, and that doesn't mean disengagement, right? So it's a tough thing to answer. And I'd love to see, I want to go back and see what LinkedIn said,
Yeah. No, thank you for your opinion there. A question we have is, other than putting your hand up for projects and third-party certifications or courses, what other recommendations do you have for bolstering CS leadership skills?
Leadership skills? Okay. You should, other than putting your hand up for special projects, you can just demonstrate leadership as an individual contributor, and you can do that through the way you present yourself within your own team meetings. You can, volunteer just informally to help out leadership. At Oracle, we had this cultural initiative within customer success called Mavericks. And it was just voluntary, but it was so important to the VP of customer success because she was trying to instill a certain kind of culture within the organization. And I found, I was part of that with her, we found that the ones who volunteered just raised their hand, and it was just an informal thing. But we get together every week, and there'd be kind of spin-off, initiatives that came from that, really around driving culture, like lunch and learns and all that kind of stuff. And those people appreciated, I think they loved the experience of actually being part of that. But I would say, generally speaking, they were stepping up as leaders, even though they were all individual contributors. They were demonstrating some of the skills and attributes necessary, I think, for modern leaders who want to do more to kind of drive just kind of a general kind of better culture within a company and within a group. So yeah, get certification, raise your hand for special projects, but I think there's day-to-day things people can do to step up and be seen as more leaderly, and not being like the formal leader, but you can start showing that you're a leader before you're even named one.
Awesome. We have a lot of questions, so trying to find one. What are some key metrics or evaluators that you think should be involved in a CSM performance review?
Well, for me, that's all about the number one job is to make your customers drive them towards having successful outcomes. Oh, my screen's all popping up here. Yeah, so you want to make sure you do the job, and the job of a CSM is to drive successful outcomes. So whatever processes exist for your role, that's like the number one thing. I'm sorry, I was distracted. Can you repeat that question, Corey?
I think you answered it. Yeah, it was
Okay.
like in terms of a performance review, what should be evaluated on a CSM role?
Yeah, so just do the job for one thing. That's the main thing. But as a leader, you're also looking at some of the less tangible. They're still tangible, but they're probably less so. And that's really around shadowing others or providing shadowing. You're basically coaching others. That's a really kind of great thing to be good at as a CSM, because it gets noticed and it's helpful for the manager to have people they can depend on. You're basically amplifying help throughout your team, and the manager can't do it all alone. And so that's something, depends on the level, but as a leader, I would expect that of my senior people. Absolutely, that's something. And also one more thing I would say is, as a more senior CSM, you'd be measured on your ability to kind of make connections outside customer success, to develop some sort of like, not a process, but relationships with other teams that you need to fulfill the service that the customers need.
Awesome. Our next question is, how many years of experience do you think is needed to become a team lead or a CSM manager or team manager?
So the answer depends on the size of the company, right? And the maturity. Maturity, what I mean is by how young the company is in terms of number of years. So I would say a small company, I could see a team lead of a CS organization after 2 years. I think 2 years is a good amount of time to spend if you have a small number of customers. But usually that means you're doing a lot with them, and you probably learn a lot in 2 years, including developing process that will help the organization grow and start scaling, which is critical. So I would say after a couple of years, I would put someone, yeah, absolutely, even if they're in their 20s or something, you could put them in a team lead role, a manager role. You'd want them to, at least this is my opinion, I would want some sort of training to take place before I'd make someone a manager. Team lead's one thing, but to be a manager, there's a lot of other things to think about. It's really around, it's not just about knowing the job of knowing how to inspire and lead people. Even if it's just an entry-level manager role, you need to be aware that that's a big part of the job, is to start getting good at that. So I would say, again, after a small company, 5 years, a large company, you're not going to be a manager unless you've been in the role for 10 years. It depends, right? I mean, They hire people at large companies who may have learned management experience somewhere else. But if let's say you come up at Oracle and you become a CSM in your 20s, you're not going to get a manager position until you're probably early 30s, I would say.
Okay. Let's have this be the last question, and it's kind of flipping the role a little bit, but coming from a leader perspective, how do you support your team to develop during hyper growth with a lot of change and demand on your CSMs?
So I would, as a leader, I would just be working really hard to shed a lot of light or expose them all to those industry forces, what's happening, where all the changes that are happening. I would just be pumping them full of information. I would make sure my meetings weren't just strictly about the job and who's doing what and how did you do last week. It would be really what's coming down the pike, not just for our company, but what are the forces at play within our typical customer environment that we should be improving at. So that's how I would be enabling my team in a really rapid kind of changing environment. I would just be participating as someone who can help them be more aware of that stuff. So I wouldn't just have them, I wouldn't expect it just of them to be aware. As a leader, I feel like I would want to help them by exposing them to all that stuff.
I think that's great advice. And that brings us to the end of our webinar. We're at the end of the hour. So I just want to thank everyone for coming and remind you again that we are recording this session, and we'll be sending out an email tomorrow with a link to the recording that you can view on demand. And at the end of this webcast, a survey will pop up. So we'd just appreciate if you would take a minute before logging off just to provide your feedback for today's webinar. And thanks again for joining us, and hope you all have a great rest of your day. And thanks, Peter.
You're welcome, Corey. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, bye.